The ripples of the British Empire's actions in China were now no longer confined to the coastal port cities they did business with. The consequences of their actions now rippled to the inland areas. In order to secure their trade interests within the coastal port cities, the British began to heavily police the waterways in and around Canton. As a result, thousands of bandits fled to the inland areas. One of these areas was the Sisal Mountain region, composed ethnically of mostly Hakka Chinese, and now serving as the headquarters of Fengyun Sen's God Worshipper Society. The Hakka and the bandits clashed almost immediately over resources. In these uncertain times of turmoil, Fengyun Sen and his God Worshipper Society's message is inspiring to the Hakka and even a few of the bandits. Not only is his message inspiring, but joining his cause offers a sort of protection, as everyone in the movement is obligated to protect the other members. Back in Guanlubu village, Hong Xiuquan has resumed his life as a teacher, but he still continues to write religious tracts. In either 1845 or 1846, he completes 2 tracts, drawing immense inspiration from the Book of Tracts and the Book of Rituals. In these books, Hong Xiuquan argues that in the distant past, China was once much like the rest of the world. He claimed that local hostilities or divisions did not exist, and further argues that the spread of localism and special interests destroyed this prelapsarian era. In 1846, a Chinese Christian convert from Canton visited Hua County and recommended strongly that Hong Xiuquan and his cousin Hong Yuangan go to visit Reverend Isaac J. Roberts, an American missionary for the American Southern Baptist Church, to hear his preaching. At the moment, both of them are too busy with teaching to accept the offer. By this time, word of Hong Xiuquan's visions and writings had made their way to Roberts. Upon hearing of these stories, Roberts became immensely curious about Hong Xiuquan's religious experience and zeal, and decided that he wanted to meet him. Early in 1847, Roberts' assistant, a convert and member of the Chinese Union, writes to Hong Xiuquan and again strongly recommends that he visits Roberts. This time, Hong Xiuquan accepts the offer and convinces Hong Yuangan to join him. Upon arrival to Canton in the middle of March 1847, Roberts is amazed upon hearing Hong Xiuquan recount his religious experience in person to him. Roberts urges both Hong Xiuquan and Hong Yuangan to stay for a while in his church to study scripture. Under Roberts' direction, the 3 of them read and analyze Karl Gutzlaff's Chinese translation of both the Old and New Testaments. This was the first time in both the lives of Hong Xiuquan and Hong Yuangan that they were able to read the Bible in its entirety. While reading it, Hong Xiuquan learned the Chinese term for the Christian God, Huangshangti, which translates to Supreme Emperor God, a term constructed in such a way in order to make it clear that no other god, spirit, or deity was more powerful. Furthermore, everything that was learned seemed to point to the authenticity of Hong Xiuquan's visions and the urgency of his mission to slay the demon devils. For as long as their money would allow, Hong Xiuquan and Hong Yuangan stayed in Robert's church and not only studied the Bible, but also took part in services, played the organ, and helped with the administration. Despite being in a country that had suffered 2 humiliating military defeats against a Western superpower, the British Empire, and with anti-Western sentiment rampant, this experience with Roberts and his church convinced both Hong Xiuquan and Hong Yuangan that all foreigners should be regarded as brothers. Hong Yuangan leaves soon after this to attend to matters back home, while Hong Xiuquan stays behind. Hong Xiuquan asks Roberts to formally prepare his soul for baptism. Roberts readily agrees and sends 2 members of his congregation to Guanlubu to investigate if Hong Xiuquan has a good moral reputation. The 2 members unearth nothing negative about Hong Xiuquan. However, they immediately worry about their employment status if Hong Xiuquan were to potentially replace them. Knowing that Roberts despised those who only wanted to join the church for financial gain, they advised Hong Xiuquan to ask Roberts for financial assistance in the future. Unknowingly walking into their trap, Hong Xiuquan innocently asks Roberts for financial assistance in the future, and as a result, loses Roberts' trust and support. On July 12, 1847, Hong Xiuquan chooses to go on the road again, without receiving an official baptism from Roberts. Despite this rejection, Hong Xiuquan develops and harbors no ill will towards Roberts or foreigners. Hong Xiuquan chooses to go west, with the intention of finding Feng Yunsen. Before leaving, Hong Xiuquan tells his fellow Christians in the Chinese Union to send word about his whereabouts to his family. Having no money to pay the boat fare back home, Hong Xiuquan decides to walk west alongside the river. Near the town of Meizishan, around 10 men dressed as government officials block his way. These men demand all of Hong Xiuquan's possessions at knife and gunpoint. Being unfamiliar with the coded messages of the criminal underworld, Hong Xiuquan has no choice but to turn over all his worldly possessions, save for a single outfit of clothing. Soon after this incident, a Qing official takes pity on him and gives him some money. Using his intellect, Hong Xiuquan preached his monotheistic message to scholars, whom admired his erudition and ideas, and showed their appreciation by giving him food and money. With the help of the goodwill of strangers, Hong Xiuquan finally reached the Huang residence in Sigu village, after about a month of travel. Hong Xiuquan questioned the villagers there about the whereabouts of Feng Yunsen. They tell him that he is in the Sistel Mountain region. Hong Xiuquan promptly sets out once more, traveling with little more than the clothing on his back. Along the way, Hong Xiuquan writes a poem on the wall of a roadside temple. This poem clearly shows his newfound sense of power, importance, and resolve, especially in the way he uses a character reserved for the reverence of emperors to refer to himself. On August 27, 1847, Hong Xiuquan reached Sistel Mountain and reconnected with an amazed Feng Yunsen and his gatherings of god-worshippers. During his time preaching in Hong Xiuquan's absence, Feng Yunsen never failed to mention Hong Xiuquan's extraordinary visions. It was the hallmark and centerpiece of his speeches. The God-worshipper society greeted the returned Hong Xiuquan with great reverence, awe, and respect. Upon reuniting with Feng Yunsen, Hong Xiuquan and Feng Yunsen lodged with the Zhangs, a prominent family in the Sistel Mountain region. Beneath the roof of the dwelling, the two men further refined their religious message. The Zhang household themselves are at this point God-worshippers or sympathetic to the cause, because the adult son begins to disseminate the writings of Hong Xiuquan and Feng Yunsen throughout the area. Every day, more and more people vow to renounce all previous beliefs and follow the teachings of Hong Xiuquan. The ranks of the God-worshipper society now number about 2,000 members, the vast majority of them ethnic Hakkas. Throughout this period, Hong Xiuquan continues to modify and reinterpret his visions. In particular, he increasingly adds more anti-Confucian elements to his dream. In October 1847, Hong Xiuquan, Feng Yunsen, and the member of the Zhang family whom had spread their message moved to a village a mile and a half away to the home of another fervent god-worshipper named Lu Lu. Soon after this relocation, the three men desecrated an idol in the village. These acts of iconoclasm greatly inspired many people who witnessed them to join the ranks of the god-worshippers, impressed that no negative supernatural consequences befell the Vandals. At around this time, the local Qing officials began to start taking the god-worshippers more seriously, as not only a threat to their power, but also a threat to the traditional way of life that had ordered Chinese society for centuries. In December 1847, Hong Xiuquan leaves Sistel Mountain and returns with his friends to the Huang family residence at Sigu village. Feng Yunsen and Lu Lu, both of whom had stayed behind, gained the attention of the Qing authorities. Feng Yunsen and Lu Lu are arrested. Lu Lu promptly dies in police captivity. Knowing that Feng Yunsen's life was in danger, Hong Xiuquan rushed to Canton to speak with Qi Ying, the Manchu governor-general of Guangdong and Guangxi provinces. In the spring of 1848, Hong Xiuquan arrives in Canton City, but quickly learns that the governor has been ordered to go to Peking by the emperor. Hong Xiuquan rushes back to the Sisal Mountain area to bring the bad news to Feng Yunsen and his people. However, during Hong Xiuquan's absence, Feng Yunsen had persuaded the authorities with his oratory skills to let him go. Though the authorities let him go, he is told not to ever come back to the region again. Feng Yunsen returns home to his family in Hua County, Guangdong Province, after a 3-year absence. Late in the spring of 1848, while Hong Xiuquan and Feng Yunsen were both absent, a Hakka charcoal burner named Yang Shuqing became the spokesperson of God the Father. Born into a poor family in the Sisal Mountain region, Yang Shuqing became an orphan at a young age, and as a result was raised mostly by an uncle. Throughout Yang Shuqing's early childhood and adulthood, he had helped his uncle's family in their charcoal and farm work. Although illiterate, he still had a keen intellect. At this time in the spring of 1848, Yang Shuqing entered a trance-like state and allowed God's voice to speak through himself. Upon Hong Xiuquan's return to Sisal Mountain, Hong Xiuquan accepts Yang Shuqing's experience as authentically divine and welcomes him to his movement. Yang Shuqing readily accepts the offer and brings on board his uncle and his family. Soon after all this, another Hakka named Xiao Caogui became part of the movement. A peasant and lumber seller by trade, married to a relative of Yang Shuqing, Xiao Caogui had nevertheless arisen within his community to become a leader. Many respected him for his legendary valor and physical strength. The event that earned Xiao Caogui a place in the nascent movement was a recent incident in which he entered a trance-like state from which Jesus Christ's voice spoke through him. Hong Xiuquan again accepted this experience as authentically divine, and welcomed Xiao Caogui to his movement. Xiao Caogui readily accepted the offer and also brings his family on board. Other people in the area also claimed to anyone who would listen that God or Jesus Christ had spoken through their body. But Hong Xiuquan dismissed everyone but Yang Shuqing and Xiao Caogui and proclaimed that they were the only spokesmen for God and Christ. After the New Year's festivals of 1849, Hong Xiuquan traveled back home to Guanlubu and learned that his father had just recently died. Manchu and traditional Chinese customs at the time called for the son of the deceased father to shave a particular part of their head and to grow a beard. Hong Xiuquan refused to do either, claiming clairvoyant powers by explaining that he knew beforehand the death of his father. Early in the summer of 1849, when it was clear that his wife was now pregnant, Hong Xiuquan says goodbye to her and heads back once more for Sisal Mountain with Feng Yunsen accompanying him. By the late summer of 1849, there were now 4 major centers of god-worshipper activity in southeast Qing Dynasty China. However, the epicenter of the movement remained, as always, the Sisal Mountain region. At around this same time, the God Worshipper Society had now become a group of over 10,000 people whose only rivals in their region in terms of ability to organize on a moment's notice were the bandits and the local Qing officials with their militias. Feng Yunsen and Hong Xiuquan set about organizing this force into an effective fighting machine. Travel between the 4 centers of God Worshipper activity was very dangerous, as God Worshipper control of the roadways was very limited. Pirates and bandits, whom had fled inland away from the coast, now preyed upon the waterways and roadways. Upon their arrival back in the Sisal Mountain area, Jesus spoke through Xiao Caogui. It is because the hearts of the congregations are not totally committed to belief in the doctrine that I want Hong and you others to go to different areas and dwell there. Those who currently believe the true doctrine are few indeed. They may revere half of it, but they reject the other half. Are you able to win over all their hearts? The leaders of the movement conclude that the myriad different God worshippers must be united in their cause and made uniform in their beliefs. Charlatans must be weeded out. The congregations of God worshippers were now having fits and speaking in tongues. Nobody knew how to make sense of any of this, so they all looked to Hong Xiuquan and his close associates for help in interpreting which of the spoken words came from either God or the devil. In the summer of 1849, Wang Zuoxing arrests and imprisons 2 god worshippers. In response, the god worshippers feel that more drastic measures are now needed in order to get their people back, alive and well. Speaking through Xiao Zagui, Jesus Christ said that all those with stores of rice are to donate half of it to try to buy the men's release. Unfortunately, all of this was done in vain, because the 2 men would end up dying in captivity. Furthermore, within a month of this incident, 2 more prominent god worshipper members are arrested by the local officials. In response, the process of fundraising for the release of the men begins anew. By this point, many prominent and wealthy families in the Sisal Mountain region supported the burgeoning god worshipper movement. In particular, the Shi, Wei, and Hu families were exceptionally wealthy benefactors. The funds from these families aided the growth of the movement enormously. These families were not just simply sympathetic to the movement, they were in fact fanatically devoted to it. In February 1850, the Hu family was on the verge of turning over most of their wealth to the movement, but were urged to hold off on the fund transfer so it could be more surreptitiously transferred at a later date. By the end of 1849 and the beginning of 1850, it is the descendants of the Manchu conquerors of China and those loyally and willingly serving them whom are now identified specifically as the demon devils to be exterminated. In the past, Hong Xiuquan was not very specific on who the demon devils were, or only made cryptic references to them being the Manchu ruling class. Sometime in 1850, Hong Xiuquan writes a poem reflecting on his desire to take immediate action against the demon devils. Hong Xiuquan now no longer wants the previously vaunted virtues of patience and humility to be the primary hallmarks of his movement, as he now has an increasingly militant vision for it. Armed confrontation between inhabitants of the region, pirates, and bandits became a regular occurrence. As a result, hundreds and then thousands of people joined the god worshipper ranks to acquire protection. Hong Xiuquan looked upon this massive influx of new members with skepticism, concerned of the sincerity and trustworthiness of their intentions. However, Xiao Zagui reassured him that they were God's people, who very much wanted to support the fledgling kingdom. Despite these reservations from Hong Xiuquan, mass baptisms of the new members followed. On many occasions, 400 people at a time were baptized in late February 1850. These new recruits were preached to at some length, and then they were taught the secret code names of their leaders. They were taught that those who acknowledged Hong Xiuquan as the chosen messenger of God were in the presence of the Old One on high, and that those who acknowledged Feng Yunsen and Xiao Zagui were in the presence of Old Elder Brother. The new masses of converts were expected to live with patience, sincerity, and to convert their family members to the movement's doctrine. As the ranks of the god worshippers grew, the leaders were met with the reality of logistics, namely, feeding and protecting the thousands of newcomers. Factoring into this issue was the desire of the leaders to ensure the continued virtuous reputation of the organization and its close-knit cohesion. Early in 1850, the god worshipper leaders, now referring to themselves as Taipings, which roughly translates to Great Peace, made a series of pronouncements ordering that men and women would be separated henceforth in the interests of decency and the common good. Feng Yunsen was upheld as a model for male behavior, while Hu Jimei, most likely a daughter of the Hu family, was announced as the paragon of female behavior. Harsh punishments such as beatings, which could very nearly be fatal, were meted out to those who broke these new rules. In the minds of the Taiping, asexuality brought everyone and the movement itself closer to God. Hong Xiuquan slowly implemented this new rule to not only unmarried men and women, but also to married people within the ranks of the Taiping. In January 1850, Hong Xiuquan received news from Guanlubu that Lai, his wife, had given birth to a boy on November 23, 1849. Hong Xiuquan named the boy Hong Tiangui, which means Heaven's Precious One. In the middle of June 1850, Hong Xiuquan called upon his family to join him in the Sisal Mountain region. Hong Xiuquan sent 3 trusted delegates back to his hometown, bearing a letter composed by him. Upon receiving the letter, his family immediately gave up all of their property, packed their bags, and headed straight to Sissel Mountain. The adults in Feng Yunsen's family chose to stay put, but they still sent Feng Yunsen's 2 sons to join their father. Sometime in 1850, a terrible disease raged across the provinces of Guangdong and Guangxi. Word quickly went around that ill people could be healed if they prayed to Hong Shuquan's god. Many began to pray to Hong Shuquan's god for the first time for the disease to go away. When the disease had run its course and faded away, those who had survived its clutches attributed their survival to Hong Shuquan's religion. As a result of this attribution, vast numbers of people joined the Taiping movement. Yang Shuqing, the vessel whom God's voice flowed through for over a year, and who had been claiming to cure the sicknesses of all true believers by absorbing their illnesses into his own body, fell ill himself with a debilitating and unknown disease. This contraction of sickness undoubtedly occurred due to his constant close contact to sick people whom he had tried to cure. Yang Shuqing became deaf and dumb. Pus poured out of his ears, and watery fluids flowed from his eyes. By all counts, Yang Shuqing was in extreme pain. For several months, Yang Shuqing lay incapacitated, when suddenly, early in September 1850, he made a full recovery. Xiao Caogui, likewise, was also struck by a mysterious disease, and throughout the spring and summer of 1850, Jesus Christ almost completely ceased to speak through him. Ulcers covered many parts of his body, decreasing his productivity significantly. Only 2 messages from Jesus Christ made it through to the movement during this period. The second communication on June 2, 1850, advised Hong Shuquan to lay low while the Qing forces and bandits exterminated each other, after which God and Jesus Christ would give the next orders. As these words were spoken, the Qing government forces were engaging in massive campaigns of bandit suppression in and around the Guiping area. On the afternoon of July 28, 1850, Hong Shuquan and his family were reunited at a tiny village in the Guiping district. 3 close family friends were with his family as well. One of them was the daughter of the Huang family, who had helped Hong Shuquan numerous times in the past. Furthering their goodwill towards the movement, this woman offered up the Huang family residences to the large family. For about a month, Hong Shuquan's family lived together nearby the Guiping district, sheltered by the Huang family. These were uncertain, treacherous times for his family and the members of the burgeoning Taiping movement, as the threat of arrest or betrayal was ever present. Sometime in either August or September of 1850, the Wei family succeeded in ensuring that the market town of Jingtian would be a safe area for the Taiping. Sensing that the time was now right, the Taiping planned an elaborate operation whereby Hong Shuquan and his family would transfer themselves north to the Jingtian area. Along the way, as planned, Hong Shuquan's family members tell rehearsed stories explaining their reason for travel to any Qing patrols that stop and question them. Despite the odds, by August 28, 1850, Hong Shuquan's family traversed the wide area near Guiping and reached the Jingtian base area. By late September 1850, the various Taiping leaders began to assemble and arm groups of troops and move them to the Jingtian area. This was done so for 3 reasons: to keep Hong Shuquan and his family safe, to keep the area itself safe, and to centralize the increasingly militant movement. In the face of armed clashes with ethnic groups hostile to the Hakka, bandits, and the looming threat of the ultimate villain, the Qing forces, the Taiping movement began to seek ways to arm their followers. Though at this point the Taiping movement's coffers overflowed with money from the fortunes of wealthy members, an exchange of funds was simply not enough to acquire weapons. Instead, they had to be procured in secret. The Wei family opened a shop in the nearby town of Jiangkou and began purchasing iron from as many sources as possible. The reason given for the purchases was that they were mass-producing farming tools. The purchased iron was then transported to the Wei family's large estate, where family members and some zealous volunteers gathered to work each night. Beneath the ghostly light of the moon, they feverishly hammered the molten iron held down upon anvils into a wide array of war equipment. A flock of noisy geese were kept near the workshop to drown out the cacophony of clanging. Taiping members with intimate knowledge of the mountainous terrain that surrounded them slipped in the workshop lugging supplies of charcoal and wood and came out gripping bundles of weapons. Each batch of weapons was then carried to a pool of water at the foot of a land formation named Rhinoceros Hill, just outside the village. The bags of weapons sank in this pool once they were set in it. The plan was to hide the weapons until the right moment came about to use them. Flags bearing emblems of the Taiping movement as well as uniforms were also manufactured at the Wei residence. Sometime in the autumn of 1850, an event occurred which would grow to provide the Taiping movement with its largest number of new recruits up to that point, a large enough quantity to form a very large army. In southeast China, armed clashes broke out between the Hakka and other ethnic groups resentful of their presence. The Hakka in this region always had to fight hard to acquire land to use for farming, and the other ethnic groups who had deeper ancestral roots in the area always did everything they could to stymie this. Every now and then, this volatile social and economic dynamic would erupt into armed conflict. By the middle of October 1850, a system of beacons and signal lights were set up and maintained all throughout the night around the Jingtian base area, so that the Taipings could see an approaching enemy force and give the base either sufficient time to prepare a defense or to evacuate. On October 29, 1850, Hong Xiuquan sent out a mobilization order to all of the various Taiping leaders whom were located all throughout southeast China, and whom each commanded scores of Taiping followers. Despite this, Hong Xiuquan still urged everyone to keep a low profile and to maintain secrecy. Hong Xiuquan explained to them that openly proclaiming their allegiance to him at this point is too risky. Instead, he assured them that he would give the signal to them all to unfurl the banners and unite as one large Taiping army with swords drawn under his command only when the time was right. The stage was now set for a massive possible armed confrontation between the Taiping and the Qing. Only a spark would be needed to light the powder keg.